Hello, and welcome back to the Interdrone Podcast, your 30,000 foot view of the commercial drone industry. It is Wednesday, March 10th, 2021. My name is CJ Smith, joined with Michael Peel, chairman of Interdrone, and our guest today, Robert Blair, owner of Blair Farms and the VP of Agriculture at AIGEN. Robert is a fourth generation diversified farmer in North Central Idaho, and 2006, so a long time ago in the drone industry. Robert became the first farmer in the United States to own and use a drone, and he's really been a pioneer in precision agriculture technology ever since. He was also the 2009 International Precision Farmer of the Year, which is an awesome award. So really happy to have him on today and talk about, as the title says, the past, present, and future of drones in agriculture. So, Robert, thanks again for joining us today. For anybody who's not familiar with you, hasn't met you at an Interdrone event, or hasn't maybe heard your name come up in the drone space before, can you talk a little bit about your background, what the drone industry was like in 2006, and kind of how you really saw the opportunity to start using drones in agriculture?
Well, thanks, CJ and Michael, for having me on. It's a great opportunity here and experience, and Interdrone is a very good organization to be with for drones. So 2006, it kind of sounds like a bad drug. How did you start using? I saw an ad in an agriculture magazine for a drone, called on it, purchased it, and the rest is history. Went from using off-the-shelf software, imagery software for photographs, to try to stitch pictures. It was horrible. There was no software. You were cobbling everything together. Autopilots, you had to program them. It was not a user-friendly turnkey system. And fast forward today, we can get a lot of good off-the-shelf drone systems, packages, sensors, on down the line, better flight time, from fixed wing all the way to multi-rotor. And so we have come a long way, but there are still challenges.
Right. So when you bought that drone in 2006, what were your plans for using it? And, what was that like? Maybe those first couple flights, first couple missions, what was the learning curve like? And, what did maybe some of your colleagues or constituents or other industry folk think when they saw you flying a drone?
Yeah, I wanted more information. You have a yield monitor on my combine, great information, but it was reactive. The crop was mature, and I could do nothing to affect the outcome of the yield. With the drone, it was, now I have something I can send up to try to make real-time decisions that can affect the bottom line. Do I have weeds, or is there some insect damage, or was there weather damage somewhere? And it allowed me to go to those areas and find out what the issues were. And it worked in conjunction with the yield monitor. But yeah, it was kind of difficult to learn. I did not have an aviation background, or a remote sensing background. So on that side, I had to go back to my junior high science to remember what a nanometer was. The drone side, yeah, there was definitely a learning curve, and they weren't the easiest or most reliable of units.
Right. I know the drone industry has come a long way since then. Again, what were some of the other farmers thinking when they saw you with the drone? Were they curious? Were they skeptical? And I guess what have some of those conversations been like, and how have those conversations changed?
Revolution is over. We're in the information revolution, and data is going to be very critical. And the growers see it. Yeah, I got ribbed a lot. I was back in D.C. for a meeting on an organization I was part of, and someone at that point in time had flown a drone into the White House area. And of course, everyone was kidding me. Were you the one doing it? So it's been a lot of fun.
Sure, sure.
Well, that seems like a gentle ribbon, but yeah, there is a price to pay for, I guess, being the first mover, right? But as far as the benefit of being the first mover, clearly you get to be a voice, and you've been a voice for a long time, as long as InterDrone's been around, in agri-drones. So I hope that pays some dividends.
It's been very helpful to not only me, but my whole family. I mean, I ended up getting 2 different fellowships and was able to travel internationally studying precision agriculture, drones, and remote sensing. And it was just amazing being able to talk to other farmers in their own country and host farmers. But where it really acted are my 2 boys that were able to interact with people from around the world, ask questions, and to realize that there is a bigger world out there, that this technology, it's not going to stop. Technology is going to keep evolving faster and faster and coming at us. And you've got to hop on the bus at some point in time and start learning it if you plan to be in agriculture. Yeah, it's given back more to me, I think, than I will ever be able to repay the industry.
I had a similar journey as far as getting just a scope of the world that, it's kind of amazing because, I mean, this technology is at the crossroads of not just software and hardware, but also traditional aviation, which has a really strong heritage to it. And when I started with drones, I was just thinking about me in my airspace, you know what I mean? And when you talk with regulators at an international level, that I was just a marketer 6 years ago, and now I've had conversations with people from Swissfoca, the FAA, and these are giant institutions, and that perspective on just, the technology isn't going to stop. It's going to keep moving. It's one thing to say it and buy into futurism, but I think what you're talking about is more understanding the actual practical building of this railroad into the future.
Yeah, I've lived it. I've watched this industry grow. I mean, I helped plant the seed, so to speak. It's, I get nostalgic sometimes looking back at how far things have come and the people I've met. But, when we take a look at the regulatory side, and I mean, spray drones can really help agriculture, but the European Union, if you take a look at their overall agriculture regulations on pesticides, one, they're trying, reduce pesticide use by 50%, which is good. I understand where they're trying to come from, but they don't allow any aerial application. So aerial application with drones is not even an option. It makes it very difficult. And then you go into other regions to where, like China, hey, fly as many as you want, basically. And they can cover a 1,000-acre field with 100 drones at one time. It's just all over the board. But here in the U.S., we're still waiting on regulations. We're still needing beyond visual line of sight for agriculture. That's one of the biggest keys that we need. We need to be able to do it autonomously at some point. The technology's there. I understand we need safety, but from 2008 to current, and we still don't have rules for agriculture. Drones,
Yeah.
something needs to change. That's a big issue.
Yeah, it seems like there's I've been watching kind of a little bit of a vanishing line in the sand. I mean, I think that's probably the fairest appraisal I could give, or most generous appraisal I can give. And you also saw a lot of people talking about things like remote ID, like that was going to be the endpoint where everything would open up, and then the rule comes down. It's like, okay, and then in 38 months, et cetera, et cetera. It makes it interesting to reflect on things like you saw with, let's say, Precision Hawk 2 years ago, where they were talking about their BV loss waiver as if it was going to be something that was going to be broadly applicable to everybody tomorrow, that they were doing the hard work for everybody. And it just it hasn't materialized in any regulatory fashion. And then we had a former regulator from Swiss Foca on 2 weeks ago, and they're going with a network-based remote ID, and that's very different than a broadcast-based like we have here in the United States. And I don't know if you know much about that, but that seems like another kind of step back from what we were promised to be at so relatively soon. So what does this mean for you on the ground, though? Like, what actual operations is it specifically stopping? Maybe that level of insight would be beneficial to the audience.
Well, for me, beyond visual line of sight, you have to keep that drone in focus. And as you can see in the background here, all the hills I have to contend with. I'm actually looking down, and where the combines are, that probably drops 50 feet from where my shoulders are at. So if you're standing over the hill behind, where behind me, you're not spraying. You could be 10 feet away from the drone, it goes over a hill, and now it's out of line of sight. And you're only, let's say, 5 to 10 feet above the crop. So that is a huge, huge area where the FAA needs to really take a look at these different market segments and tailor the rules for the specific industries. Flying cell towers is completely different than flying a spray drone in agriculture, which is different than flying a drone for image analysis in agriculture. They're two different airspaces. They're two different applications. And we just need the regulators to come on board. We need Congress actually to make legislation and make the FAA move in that direction, move quicker. That would be very helpful.
Right. It's interesting you bring up towers because I think it's the National Association of Tower Erectors was able to get some influence on a rule early on prior to remote ID rule, that if the rule had stayed as it was originally written, would have meant that tower inspections would have been impossible. So do you feel like there's just less advocacy happening on the agriculture side? There's less maybe influence in the chambers from ag, and that's contributing to kind of a stalled bit of progress on this front?
Well, agriculture has a strong voice on the Hill, and because everybody needs to eat. Mm-hmm. But with that said, agriculture has different priorities, and drones are not one of them. Right. And if drones were able to solve the real issues growers at the ground low level that growers are needing, agriculture would be right there and make it a priority. But right now, it's not a priority issue. Prices, trade agreements, what's the weather going to do, the new Congress, labor, on down the line, those are priorities. Right. Drones, well, if it works, it works. If not, okay, it doesn't bother me. But that's where the drone industry and the precision ag industry need to get together to work with the grower groups to say, here is legislation we need to have happen. Go to the grower organizations and say, can you put this in your policy book, and can we make this push to make it happen? That's when that takes place, then Congress will act, and we can start working on regulatory solutions that work on the ground.
Robert, we had a question coming in on the chat. So Mark 1075 is asking, can you speak to using drones to target pests and invasive species? He says he's more thinking about forestry, but also for farming as well.
All right. Well, thank you for that question. Targeting specific species of pests. Well, there's 3 types of pests: insects, weeds, and diseases. The diseases at this point are probably one of the easier ones if you focus on a specific disease. Donna Del Part of Idaho State University has done some great work in potatoes and isolating PVY virus infected plants. The plants are then eradicated and killed so that they don't spread the virus. The same could be done in forestry. If we take a look at, is there a bark beetle infestation in ponderosa pine? Those type of things. Another one are invasive species, weed species. We can identify different plants if we do enough AI and edge computing to identify them. And so if we were to use that in a forestry setting, in a rangeland setting, where the terrain is steep and rugged and you can't get there by foot as easily, and safety concerns, we could use the imagery along with a spray drone to tackle those invasive species. Yeah, there's ways to do it. It just comes down to how big of an issue and who's willing to put money to create the solution.
Right. He and Mark also asked the same question for frost damage assessments. Is that anything that you've had experience with, and can you speak a little bit to that?
So frost damage assessment, I would imagine he is talking more about fruit trees and berry bushes and that, or possibly frost damage in crops. I have not worked on that, and I am not aware of that, but I would imagine there is a way to calculate, especially early in the season. I think there would be a way to do that. I'm just not as familiar with that though. But expanding on that, just frost damage, drones could play a huge role in the crop insurance industry. So you have an agency called Risk Management Agency within USDA. They oversee all crop insurance. And right now, basically, you go out to adjust a claim, the farmer or the adjuster takes their hat off, throws it, and say, okay, that's where we're going to do our scouting and look to see where the problem is. And if we take a look at the Farm Bill, crop insurance is the number one farmer targeted wedge of the pie. I mean, over 80% of the Farm Bill is nutrition and food stamps. And so I believe crop insurance is roughly about 8-9% of that budget. So it's a big component from the farm side. But yeah, I think if you expand it from frost damage to crop insurance, there needs to be more done there.
Interesting. It's actually Mark's question is a great segue into one of the articles I sent to you yesterday, Robert. So, and I just shared this in the chat for anybody that's tuning in. So, drones versus hungry moths, and the Dutch are using high tech to protect their crops. Robert, you mentioned you even, I think, had met this gentleman, Rob Bond, who He enlisted these drones to tackle pests in his greenhouses. These are palm-sized drones that destroy moths, which produce caterpillars that can chew up his crops. I thought one thing that was really interesting is that he says in the article, you don't want to kill a ladybug because a ladybug is very helpful against these pests. He says, so these drones are meant to kill the bad pests, not the good ones. And he even says that some of the good ones are very expensive. He says he pays 50 cents for one single bumblebee to pollinate in his greenhouses. And, it's pretty remarkable that they're coming up with some technology that can in real time tell the difference on these insects and destroy the malicious ones and let the good kind of breeding insects go about their business. So do you have any thoughts on that, Robert, and maybe where the future of this tech might go?
Yeah, so Rob Bond and Copper Crest is very interesting, very innovative. His greenhouse operation in the Netherlands was fabulous. I learned a lot on agriculture that I knew nothing about. I mean, there's so many different segments, and greenhouse production and microgreens. I never even heard of microgreens. They were weeds to me from some of the stuff he had there. But, controlling pests, I remember when, I go back long enough, I remember Wine Hawk before it became Precision Hawk. And they were using the drone in order to scare off birds in vineyards. I'm going back a ways. So that drones and controlling pests and doing pest management has been at the forefront of this industry, and how they are specifically targeting this moth is interesting. But that's the key. There's the balance. How do you not harm the beneficials, such as pollinators or other insects that prey on pests that create problems like aphids and ladybugs that eat them. So yeah, there's a fine balance. It's really an interesting scenario, but it's a controlled environment in the greenhouse and makes sense. I don't know how, when you look at a quarter section, you're a half mile by half mile square. How in the heck are you going to patrol that and keep all the insects out? Because you're looking at a 3D cube, and yeah, that's probably not going to happen the same way.
Right.
But I think there is a way to do that, and that we can start heading down that road and targeting insects on the plants themselves in bigger cropping situations. But yeah, that was a very interesting use, and it was fun to see what he was doing there.
Right.
It just shows how small the world really is.
Right. Right.
Well, I see a lot of these kind of researchy kind of implementations, and usually I'll wave them off and say, I don't even want to read about this, but this seems like at least it's the genesis of something. Although I question scalability. So I guess it would be at least initially limited to smaller greenhouse environments. Is that correct, Robert?
No, I was just thinking of a scenario where this could really work well, and that is killer hornets. The killer hornets are coming in onto honeybee hives and that, killing them, just chopping their heads off. Well, why can't we create a drone that does the same onto the killer hornets and goes clear back to their nest?
Are they visually distinct enough?
That I don't know. Size-wise, they're I think like 6 times bigger than a honeybee and 2 or 3 times bigger than a normal hornet, bald-faced hornet.
Wow.
So, I was just spitballing here thinking there's a practical application where you could have drones set up on these beehives and possibly protect the hive from predators. And so that's outside. That's not quite controlled in a greenhouse, but it's still doing something and protecting pollinators. And also take that one step farther. You know, there's been talk for years about using micro drones to pollinate. A potential out there. We're on the ground floor. I mean, we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg here on what drones and the technology can do for agriculture.
Yeah, the pollinating drones. I think just saw a recent update to the hummingbird drone concept. So basically, wings are replaced with rotors, and the hummingbirds can pollinate. These hummingbird drones can pollinate flowers. So interesting how some of the nations now than some of the seemingly more real promising just results.
Yeah, and it just takes.
I'm going to put this in the chat.
We got another article, CJ?
We do. So Wisconsin business provides internet to students through drones. I'll put this article in the chat in a second. So Wiscliff is a drone company in Three Lakes, expanding a drone to provide internet to students in areas with low connectivity. And I thought this was interesting.
Really choppy today.
Sorry, can you guys hear me now? So providing internet to students in places with low connectivity. Robert, you and I were speaking that one of the challenges is when doing drone flights in agriculture sometimes is being able to upload all that data, right? And so can you just speak to, I guess, maybe just elaborate on those challenges and potential ways of mitigating them and getting the data in areas where there is really poor internet connection?
Well, it sounds like you could take advantage of it because you are breaking up a little bit. You know, that the view, you know, it reminds me of the commercial. Can you hear me now? You know, everyone's doing that. Am I there? You know, as far as technology has gone, you know, connectivity, especially in rural areas, is a big issue. And sending a drone up to provide better connectivity is not a new concept. We were talking about that 5+ years ago, using a drone in rural areas, and actually using tethered blimps before that to provide connectivity signals. But one of the drawbacks with a drone is weather. If we get windstorms or hail or heavy rains, how is the connectivity going to be there if you can't fly the drone? That is a challenge. Because in a day's worth of flights on my farm, I can generate 50 to 60 gigabytes worth of data. And I currently only have a 2 megabyte upload speed. In other words, it's not happening. It's like trying to put a fire hose worth of water through a straw. So there are challenges. Is the solution the drone? Is the solution better networks? Is the solution satellite networks? I think it can be a combination of all of them, especially if you just need limited extra bandwidth. So if I'm out there providing a service and having that 50, 60 gigabytes worth of data, it could throw a drone up and it can connect high speed over 5G or whatever. That would be very, very useful. Yeah, there is potential there. And, you know, we found out this last year very quickly, the deficits of connectivity in rural America, with schools shutting down and everybody home trying to use very limited bandwidth. It was horrible. That's where you work from 3 to 7 o'clock in the morning, because no one else is up, and you have it almost all to yourself. You try doing it at night when everybody's trying to stream movies. It doesn't work.
Right.
So there are potentials for it. How do we get it out into rural America and other rural settings? That I'd have to take a look deeper into.
Sure.
I think there's a deep economic issue there that you're kind of raising to the surface, which, not having internet is an equality of opportunity issue, right? So if you want to, give all Americans equal opportunity to prove their worth, access to internet is like a fundamental for success in today's world. And I think you're right that COVID kind of shone a big light on what has been known. I mean, it's a known lack of infrastructure investment to get internet out into rural areas. And the solution is not to say just move to a city. That's, as I think your life itself proves, there are aspects of our lives that rely on rural living, and that there's you can't cast aside these populations because they're actually necessary for the function of the nation, period. And and if that person wants to be able to move to the city, how are they going to do that if they can't get a resume online, or they don't have the technical skills that actually would get them hired at a elite coastal startup? I think any solution around this, it's nice to see drones, but also satellite, also just general on the ground investment, because as you spoke to, there's other issues, particularly weather, that can interfere with both satellite and drone-based solutions for actually getting that signal to people. This is just nice to see drones actually making a difference somewhere, and I'd like to see this scaled up.
Right. Robert,
Well,
go ahead.
if we look past, back at the, 100 years of agriculture from 1900 to the turn of the century, one of the biggest and most important technology evolutions to come along was electrification of rural communities and farms. Just getting electricity to the farmstead. I mean, that was huge. We have a similar challenge today that was starting to be solved in the 1930s. And we can't get connectivity to rural America. There's something wrong there. That is a challenge. And, from a rural perspective, I don't want to pit people against each other, but when I hear saying, how, areas in cities and that low income areas in cities have it bad and don't have the same challenges, like you said, brought up, inequality. I would like to see that compared with rural students in rural schools, to where at least they have connectivity in a city. In a lot of cases, we don't here, or limited. And so, there is a disparity between the rural population and our urban cousins. How do we solve it? How do we come together to fix the issue? That's the challenge.
I think there's something interesting you're hitting on there. There's political incentives to pit those two populations against each other rather than addressing the issue, right? It allows kind of both sides to pick a side, pick a population, and then ignore the need for progress on that. We need internet infrastructure in this country, period. Even if you were only to focus on highly populated urban areas, we are still behind what is going on, let's say in South Korea, let's say in China. And that's the reason for that is because we built it first and we stopped. We need to keep progressing and getting it to everybody. because it's to our advantage to connect our population.
Well, you take a look at what happened in Africa. Africa skipped a whole generation of technology.
Right.
Straight to Wi-Fi,
And
straight to
cell.
phones, straight to mobile.
Straight to mobile. I mean, that is a life changer. And here they are in Africa, are able to have, in a lot of cases, better connectivity in some instances than we do in rural America. I mean, it's crazy. But
it is.
Seeing the impact that technology and what connectivity has done for a whole continent, to be able to be connected, is intriguing. I mean, at the end, late last year in December, I was on watching a conference on precision agriculture in Africa. It was fascinating on what they're trying to do with technology there, from drones to robots to connectivity, software on down the line. And, they're progressing, they're moving ahead, and technology is at the center of it. Connectivity is the foundation.
You even see that with drones themselves, right? Where they're skipping straight to that as the crop metric or crop data aggregator in very, very small places where they're not going to be able to build infrastructure on the farm itself. Like if you hand them a drone, at least they can get started with this concept and improve yields.
Well, and let's bring this full circle. Talking about, using drones to kill moths in the Netherlands at Copper Crest. We're in a global economy. I've been there. I've seen it. Mm-hmm. We are connected not only as human beings and collaborators, but as competitors. We need this technology to stay relevant, especially in agriculture. We have a tremendous challenge of feeding 9.5 billion people by the year 2050 on less land, less inputs, and it's going to take technology to make it happen. Right. And I seriously believe drones will play a huge role in that case right there. In the solution.
In automation in general. So we kind of started talking about this prior to the podcast, but if you think about things like trucking, like commercial trucking, there aren't actually enough drivers. So when we see things like the Tesla truck and people get scared that it's going to eliminate an entire swath of jobs, I think you have to start with, are people filling those positions in the first place when you take that line? And then secondly, if we have a requirement for things to be shipped to allow other lifestyles to still exist, and then you have to make this investment, otherwise you're holding back progress. And I think there's an analogy there to drones, that if we're unable to feed what is an increasing population, then because of lack of human hands, why not put the investment there? It's a solid investment to keep people alive, period. It seems like one of the most fundamental things you could discuss when talking about humans.
Well, and I think you're talking about automation and being autonomous in general. At AIGEN, we're working on autonomous ground robots to kill weeds, and working with drones to maximize their efficiency. And that will be, that'll be part of my topic at Interdrone this year, is showing the results of that. I mean, we are a startup company, but for us to work in California, we can't conduct trials there. I have to get a variance for a ground robot to do any work, because it's interesting. If you take a look at it from a farmer's perspective, we have a population that's saying, we don't want you to use pesticides. We don't want you to use any kind of mechanical means because of erosion. And labor pools are scarce, which was what you were getting at, Michael. So what is that leaving the grower in California? Robotics, automation. But because of the regulations and protectionism from the unions to save jobs, that there's not enough farmers there to fill, you can't even use robots. Where does that leave the grower of staying viable and sustainable? If we're all about sustainability, we've got to look at the whole picture there. And automation is a key point in agriculture, which brings us back to BVLOS. You know, visual line of sight. How can we automate it? It's there. It comes down to safety, and the regulations are holding up progress. That's where agriculture.
So just to take devil's advocate there, I mean, it doesn't seem like what you proposed is actually even replacing a job yet, though. So, you know, is it just a reactive kind of measure from unions to kind of preempt any automation period? Because it seems a little bit, as described, insensible.
Well, I will know more come tomorrow. I've just started going down this road, looking at it. How do you if you're going to work in California, how does this happen? I mean, I talked to a former Secretary of Ag of California. He didn't really know there were rules that were banning or that did not allow for automation on a farm like that, where you have to apply for a variance. And so it's one of those kind of quiet secrets that, well, you could get into trouble, but we're not announcing it. And I mean, it's a hoop that you have to navigate, right, wrong, or indifferent. The premise of it, why it happens, I don't care. I really don't. I'm just thinking, I'm looking at it from how can we operate in California and how can we help growers be successful? Plain and simple.
Robert, that's a great segue into one of the...
Got a third article, CJ?
Well, we have another question from Mark. So, Robert, can you address the benefits or drawbacks of more automated equipment, specifically cost versus efficiency?
Cost versus what?
Efficiency.
Well, if you take a look at the trend of rural population since the 1900s, it's continually going downhill. I've driven through the Midwest and saw the results and remnants of what happened in the early to mid 80s when interest rates hit 18% and farmers and small communities went defunct, ghost towns. Automation is going to help agriculture survive, but the issue and the problem area comes in that transition point, transitioning away from human laborers to machine laborers. We have, some of it you can replace, some you can't. And that's what agriculture and the tech industry needs to figure out. Where are the problem areas? What are the pinch points? And what do we need, from a tech side, what do we need to do to create the solutions? We need agriculture to tell us, where are your problems? I mean, how many people, one of the things I usually ask in a session that I'm speaking at a conference is, how many of you have been on a tractor in the last month, last 6 months, in a year? And, you don't see very many hands. And there has not been as good of interaction from the tech side with agriculture. How can you create a product if you have not asked the customer what their problems are? And so I see that as being very important.
So what's top of mind for you and AIGEN as we kind of move further into 2021, into 2022? What are you looking to do next with regards to your drone operations?
So with AIGEN, we're going to be doing on-ground trials with our robots to kill weeds and looking how spectral imagery we can help the robots do a better job. Can we target specific weeds? I mean, this comes back to what we were, I think it was Mark who asked the question, what about, in forestry, can we target specific pests? That's what we're looking at. Can we solve that problem? Can we create those solutions to help farmers do a better job? When we take, the issue that's going on in agriculture right now is you do have resistant weeds to some herbicides, and you don't have enough labor. What is the farmer supposed to do when policies and regulations are not favorable to get new products, herbicides or pesticides into the marketplace, and you have a declining labor pool? How are we going to continue to keep our farms running? It's going to come down to technology, and it's going to come down to solutions like we're working on. Right. I mean, there's a lot of work being done in robotics in the European Union because of these issues. They don't have the labor pool. And they're being mandated to reduce their pesticide use by 50% by 2030. That's a huge challenge. As a farmer, I'm there scratching my head. How am I going to do this? Or should I just give up, sell the farm, and go retire to Tahiti or somewhere?
Please don't. Please don't. We need the food. Yeah, well, no, I understand.
But that's where society has lost sight of an industry of farm families and what we're doing and needing, and taking on causes that feel good without looking at the ramifications. And so I truly believe, I'm looking in my crystal ball here, that automation, machine learning will help agriculture meet this challenge. The pain point is going to be that transition area.
Right. Progress can be painful sometimes.
Well, so you equate it, if you take a look at agriculture and you look at that transition from horses to tractors, okay, what happened to all that harness? What happened to the horses? What happened to the farmers? Now, instead of a 40-acre field being grown to feed the horses, that 40-acre field was being turned into cash to buy the tractor.
Right.
And they could farm that much quicker. They didn't have to stop to take a break to water the horses, to feed them at midday or whatever. Right. But the ramification of that is you go to any farm site, old farmstead, and all that horse-drawn equipment is sitting in a pile. Well, usually it's in an antique shop now, but
American Picker style, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But you go from pull combines to self-propelled. They were scrapped because there's no value.
Right.
What's
just completely atomized in a decade.
When we get to true automation and, the car I'm driving, that 68 Camaro, RS, am I going to be allowed to drive that on the road because the regulations are going to say, no, it has to be autonomous now? What's going to happen to that? And so we've got to look at this transition period and how do we navigate it as well from a regulatory and an economic standpoint. That's going to be crucial.
Right. I think the horse.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I went to the Formula E. Can you hear me, CJ?
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
What were you going to say, CJ?
I was just going to say, I think the horse
So I went to the Formula.
Interesting.
So a couple of years ago, I went to the Formula E races, which is all electric cars, and I was not expecting to be impressed on any level. Although I have interest in electric cars like a Tesla or et cetera, just find any advancement in technology interesting, right? But one of the things I walked away with was now it's fundamentally looking at a Formula One race with a completely different lens of this will go away at some point, and the other car, the electric driven car, that's just going to be the replacement. And I think I was just listening to you and thinking about there's going to be a lot of things that their context, their original context and meaning just gets changed overnight almost. It's like impossible to look at them the same way again. So maybe that'd be the case for farming, in that the new context will overtake the old.
Well, so I'm going to put a shout out to our CTO who worked at Tesla and understands this area excellent within the battery technology. But the issue becomes transitioning from conventional type vehicles to that electric. What are we going to do for those disadvantaged population that can't afford to buy a new vehicle?
Mm-hmm.
And if the regulations continue, well, if you don't drive an electric car, you're going to be fined because of your emissions or carbon or global, whatever tag you want to put on it. Or that farmer who is just trying to hang on and retire, for another 5 years, but sorry, you've got to have an electric combine, electric tractor, and you need to have it next year. Basically unfunded mandates. How are we, so the question becomes, how are we going to solve that economic issue for the disadvantaged parties to make that transition? That's where these transition periods are so crucial to get right.
There's a kind of favoritism in regulation to say no to things as the form of progress to push things forward. Because it's actually, in some cases, it's harder to get funding to push things forward. We rely on private industry usually to solve that equation. But as you're saying here, that there's consequences to saying no.
Yeah, there is. I mean, the labor issue in California. Okay, if the $15 minimum wage gets passed, they also have a law in California that the farm workers can't work overtime. And if you don't have enough farm workers and it rains and you lose a week and can't get out in the field, how are you going to catch up? And so while the regulations for one side look good, it hurts another. I mean, think about it like a metronome. A metronome going back and forth, back and forth. All the noise is made on the left or the right, but all the work gets done in the middle. And we have to ensure that the solutions are the same way, that they're not too far left, too far right, but work for everybody and the majority in the middle.
Right. Well, Robert, we're coming up on an hour here. So any final thoughts, and how can people get in touch with you to learn a little bit more and maybe ask some follow-up questions if they have some?
Oh, leave me alone. I'm out here in God's country. I like my solitude. COVID's been a godsend where I don't have to see anybody. No, it's so you can probably get my email up there on your guys' website is probably one way, but my email is Robert and this is all spelled out, 3canyonfarms.com.
Great.
Robert at 3canyonfarms.com. Yeah, you can probably type it in the in the chat there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're living in exciting times, and we've got tremendous challenges. But for me, being part of an industry I knew nothing about, all I wanted was the imagery. I didn't care that it was a UAV, a UAS, or drone.
Right.
I don't care what it was called. I wanted the image. I wanted the data. I wanted to solve problems. And that's what we have to focus on. We don't need to focus on the cool technology. We need to focus on, is what we are building and doing solving a problem for the industry?
Right.
I mean, we're in exciting times. And I look forward to our trials this year with the ground robot and our drone to see what we come up with. I'm excited to hopefully have that in my presentation at Interdrome this year.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah.
CJ, you want to take us out?
Great way to close up the episode. So thanks again for joining us today, Robert. Thank you everybody for tuning in live. We'll put some of that contact info in the description of this podcast, and we will see everybody next week. So thanks again, Robert.
Hey, thank you guys. Have a great rest of your week.